Well, good morning. Welcome to Lunching on the Books. I'm Harold Plunkett, your chairman of the committee, and our speaker is here. It's a delight to have y'all with us today. I want to thank Ron, Miss Shirley. We've got Janice and Julianne back there helping out, so let's give them a hand. We always want to thank Bonnie Gaines for helping out. She's the assistant here that makes all this happen, along with Jeff. And I can't say enough, we're going to miss Jeff, aren't we? But good luck to him and his ventures. He tells me he's going to continue living in Tupelo, so that's a good thing. So let me go ahead and get on with this. We have with us today Steve Holland. All of y'all know, but I'm going to read a brief bio. He gave me his bio. I had a chisel of the Well, okay, you didn't give it to me. I went to your website and found it, and I scrolled and scrolled and scrolled. Just playing. Steve is the third of 6 sons, the 5th generation Lee Countian. Steve graduated in 1973 from Nettleton High School. He has a degree in business administration from Mississippi State, a degree from Northwest Community College in mortuary science, a master's degree in Southern Studies from the University of Mississippi. That covers it all, doesn't it? He's a farmer and owner of the Holland Funeral Home. Steve served in the Mississippi House of Representatives from Lee County for 31 years, and he was the first Mississippi legislator to be inducted into the Mississippi Political Hall of Fame. Notice I paused at the right time. He has won hundreds of awards for his work with the least, the last, and the most vulnerable among us, and has held several national legislative positions. He serves on numerous boards and commissions, including his passion, the Regional Rehabilitation Center, and Sanctuary Hospice House, which he helped establish. He's an avid reader, a historian, and Steve has over 1,000 first edition Southern authored books in his personal library. And if you've ever been to his house, it's books and more books. In every room you go in, there's another bookshelf. And I think the last time I was over there, he said, "Harold, you think I could fit a bookshelf right there?" So it's that kind of a thing. I've known Steve since the 11th grade. We graduated high school together, played football together, ran around together. Occasionally, his mother would let us borrow her Oldsmobile Electra 225. And if you remember what those things looked like, they were like a battleship. And we could not only double date, we could triple date and quadruple date. And we used to go to the Lee Drive-In and see how many people we could get in the trunk and get in free. And that trunk was huge, y'all. It would hold 4 comfortably and 8 uncomfortably. But we've had a great time over the years, and without any further comments, Mr. Holland.
What did y'all do once you got out of the trunk?
We won't tell Jack, but I'll see you privately about that. Yeah. Well, what a pleasure to have you here today. I don't know how many books I've reviewed over 25 years here at this thing, but numerous. I was here I think in November last year, reviewing George Allen's book, Presidents That Have Known Me. It seems like, and I'm not sure what that's about, except maybe it's about what I am, I always review some historical book or some political book. I remember one time Babe Gratz assigned me a book on oh, Lord, our congressman was such a Veterans Affairs from Meridian. I'm having a scene. Who? Sonny Montgomery. Sonny Montgomery, yeah. And that was the worst book I've ever read in my life. But by golly, I reviewed it and I told stories because I knew Sonny personally, and we got through it. But I love doing this. Harold, that was a very nice, generous introduction. It reminds me of an introduction I had in 1983 by my newly minted daughter from my wife's first marriage, who wanted to campaign with me in that campaign. Her name's Emily. She is now the plant manager of the new startup Toyota worldwide battery plant in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm very proud of her. But she wanted to campaign with me. Well, when you're campaigning, you don't have time to drag a little 2.5, 3-year-old around with you. Really, you just don't, do you, Sarah? Because you got to make hay while the sun shines. Well, Emily, I decided we were going to work the Plantersville precinct where we lived in the last week of that campaign. And by the way, we won that campaign, maybe thanks to Emily, but and served 36 years, as Harold told you. But we were at a black lady's house named Miss Foster, a sweet soul, great family friend of ours. And I said, Emily, I'm going to let you go see Miss Foster. And she had the push cards and all the info, Sue. And she walked up to the door, knocked real hard, and Miss Foster came to the door, and she presented to the card and said, please vote for this man. And Miss Foster just immediately said, well, who is this? And Emily said, oh, it's my mama's latest husband. I'm not sure your introduction rivaled that one, but that was a good one, and I appreciate it. Well, as I told you, I don't know how many book reviews I've done, but I've loved every one of them. I love reading. I wish I had more time to read. I've certainly got the books, as Harold said. It's actually approaching now 2,000 Southern authored books. And I have a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird. I think it's worth $39,000 the last time I checked. And guess what? I can't find it because I've hid it from myself. It's in my house. I know it's in my house, but I don't know where it is. I'm going to go through all those books. I think I put it behind some of the bookcases somewhere. But it's just a hobby I have of collecting books. And occasionally I get to read them, and I love that better than anything. But I bought a lot of books, and I buy all of my books where? Reads. If they don't have it, they get it for me. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate you. But anyway, I think I've told you all this, and it may have been a long time ago, so I'm going to tell you one more story, and then we'll get into this book that I'm going to talk about today. I was 6 years old. It was 1961. And Mother, a young lady at the time, Sadie, y'all remember Sadie, my mama, we were in the field. There were 6 Holland boys, and we were all little. I was in the middle. So there were a couple of babies almost by that time, and then 2 older that were already driving a tractor. And Mother had the field hands out chopping cotton. It was about June or July, and it was on the backside of a 70-acre field. And, of course, I didn't do anything but pester all the hands. They loved me because I'd keep them from chopping from time to time by talking to them. But all of a sudden, this huge tank-looking truck drives up in that cotton patch and runs all the way around the end rows and comes, and a lady by the name of Miss Birdie Patton. Y'all remember Miss Birdie, some of you do. Bowled out of that truck, walked straight to my mama and said, Miss Holland, I'm Miss Birdie Patton, the Lee County Bookmobile librarian, and I'll be coming here every Thursday until I'm not the Bookmobile librarian. And I am going to teach your boys to read and your field hands if they will accept my hospitality. And Mother said, well, I think that's excellent. And I remember getting as a 6-year-old on that old Bookmobile. It was a 1948 model, best I remember. And I was so absolutely fascinated by Miss Birdie and by the fact that this truck had books in it. I just never thought about that before. And that was the start of my love of reading. And I give her full credit. Mama wasn't bad, but I give her full credit for my insatiable appetite for literature. And I remember as she left, I'll never forget the quote. She said, Miss Holland, your boys may not be able to go to the world, but I can bring the world to them every Thursday right here on this farm. And that's what she did. And till I aged out. And then the old library was here, and we had the Christopher Robin room. Do we still have that here? Do we still have do you call it Christopher Robin room? We don't call it that anymore. It's a kid's room. with kids' books. And I got blue ribbons for about the next 7 years for reading 45 books every summer, thanks to Miss Birdie. And I got a chance, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, to be the keynote addressee at the National Library Association meeting in Omaha, Nebraska. And I told that story. I spun my entire speech, Camille, around Miss Birdie and the value of a bookmobile, teaching somebody to love learning and reading. And I tell you, when you got through, you thought I'd preached a funeral. I wanted to dry in the house, but they at least played my plane ticket in the hotel room out there, and I appreciate that, and I had fun doing that. Well, a week ago, Jeff, Monday, I believe, or Tuesday, I read a book 2 years ago called Presidential Libraries and Museums. And it's a fairly academic book. The one I'm reviewing today is not very academic. I'm just being honest with it about front. It's more like a travel guide, but it's very interesting. And let me tell you why I chose. Harold had first assigned me, because I just read the books that these people that run this thing assign me, because it's an opportunity for me to learn something new. Harold and Brenda and I, about 3 years ago, decided, we're 55 models, 1955, that we were going to go on a bucket list tour of every presidential library in America. I know I love history. I love studying what somebody before me did, because you can learn a lot from that, a lot of wisdom in that. And so we did, and we have, let me just give you a little history on that. The presidential library system started in 1939 with FDR. He had collected a vast amount of papers. Previous to that, there were presidential libraries. There's still way more than 15 presidential libraries. As a matter of fact, we have a world-class presidential library on the campus of Mississippi State University. And if you're ever down near Starkville, go in and spend 2 to 3 hours at the Ulysses S. Grant Presidential Library on the campus of Mississippi State. Now, that's about the most oxymoronic situation that I know of. The Ulysses S. Grant Presidential Library is in the state of Mississippi. And he whooped us at Vicksburg and everywhere else. But anyway, it's there, and it got there because a professor named Dr. John Marszalek, who was head of the history department, had been the private chairman of the Grant Library that was housed, I think, in Ohio somewhere. I can't remember. But it was loose leaf, and it was not cataloged, and it was just memorabilia of Grant. And I remember sitting in appropriations. We were in the last week. Dr. Mark Keenum from Mississippi State called me, and he said, "Holland, you're running the IHL appropriations. I'm fixing to spring something on you that I'm almost embarrassed to on one hand, and on the other hand, I've never been so exhilarated in my life." He said, "Can you find me $9.5 million today to build the Grant Presidential Library?" And I said, "Well, it's a hell of a case, one thing, for a last-minute call. You know, we had the books sealed, you might say. But I did like my old boss, Jamie Whitten, used to do in the United States Congress. I pulled out my pen and wrote $9.5 million earmarked to Mississippi State for the Grant Presidential Library. They raised about that much more. And it's not recognized by the National Archives and History Records Division in Washington, D.C., but it is a very authentic presidential library. And then when that came, the largest private collection of Lincolnia materials in the world was very short order donated to the Grant Library. So the largest private collection on Abraham Lincoln, one of the great presidents, is at Mississippi State. How about that? Things work for good. But anyway, the presidential library system started with FDR. FDR came into the presidency at a bad time. We'd just gone through the Depression, and he thought it the right thing to do to have his records and every other president's records heretofore from that time housed in an official United States government-sanctioned presidential library. So he donated a big portion of his estate at Hyde Park, New York, to build his own library. And that was the start of it. Hoover had been president before him. Hoover got wind of it and was very disappointed that he wasn't included. And he went to FDR and begged FDR to include his library, which we will be going to maybe later this year or first of next year. It's in Iowa. And he felt left out, and he thought he was being punished because of the Depression. So old benevolent FDR by executive order put the Hoover Library in this original act. Harry Truman solidified it through Congress in 1955 when he got passed through the Congress the Presidential Library Act of 1955. And every president since then must, it's not a maybe, must donate their papers, their manuscripts, their documents, even their most personal information, and to house in a presidential library. I know a lot of you have been to presidential libraries before. I feel real sure. Give me a show of hands if you've just been to one. Okay, so you sort of get the genre of what presidential library is about. They're the most fascinating things I've ever been in, almost. And I've been in a lot of places, several foreign countries, and seen a lot of interesting stuff and participated in a lot of interesting stuff. But I don't know of anything that has brought together the presidential library system as a conduit of American history better. You can go to Philadelphia and see the Liberty Bell and those kind of things, and that's all good. But you are capturing precisely and completely the entire life of the country through these presidential libraries, their personal lives, their family life, their significant contributions, and in most cases, their fallacies. I'll talk about it in a minute, but we just returned last month from the Nixon and Reagan libraries in California. And I don't mind saying I was just real dubious about going to the Nixon library. I said, what will this be like? It was so perfectly fascinating and so historically significant and proper that it just shocked me. You walked in, and the first thing you saw was booth after booth and exhibit after exhibit on Watergate. I figured they'd cover that up. They made you deal with that the minute you walked in the door. And I so appreciated that. And I also recollected, because I was old enough to live and know things going on in the world in the Nixon administration, it was just absolutely put together as good maybe as any of them we've been to. I'm not going to say it's my favorite. I'll tell you about what is my favorite right now with some to go. But anyway, the book is Presidential Homes and Libraries. Now, I'm not going to talk about the homes today because I don't have time. But it's more or less a travel guide is what this is. But it's got tidbits on every presidential library all the way back to George Washington in this book. Now, see, George Washington has a library, but it's privately endowed. Oh, by the way, I thought an interesting fact about the history of these libraries. The government does not build them. The private sector has to build them, and then the government owns them. And each of the libraries has their own board of directors that sort of manages and maintains and set the curriculum for that library, the exhibits, and so forth. So they're not government-owned buildings, but because of the 1955 Act passed by Truman, all of the records of each president has to go to their library. And since FDR, every president has the right to choose where their library will be. And so that's pretty significant. We found in our travels that actually about half of them are connected with the birthplace of the presidents, which is unique to me. And then some of them are just, the Bushes are on 2 college campuses that they loved in Dallas and College Station, and we'll talk about that again in a minute. But they're fascinating repositories. And they've got manuscripts in them. They've got the personal letters that the president wrote to folks. So many of them you can see on display as you walk through. And then they've got, oh my gosh, I don't know what you call it, a manuscript room, all of them, where all these things are housed, and you can make appointments. And any citizen of the United States can go and pull LBJ's civil rights papers. They're all there. So they're twofold. They're not just a museum, they are a library and an archive of that president's time in office. But I had a blast, and I've had a blast. I've already toured 12 of them myself, but not with my besties, Brendan Harrell. So we're going to go back and see all of them but the Kennedy. We've seen the Kennedy individually, and we're just not going to go back to Boston because our Social Security checks are not large enough to sustain that. But anyway, I found all of them to be perfectly fascinating. I told you about FDR, and he gave the land. Now, they have to privately buy the land or work with the states, the various states or universities to donate the land. Obviously, Mississippi State donated 2 floors. We had to build 2 floors on the Mitchell Memorial Library to house the Grant Presidential Library. So it's a lot of work that goes into that to build these. The only 2 left that are considered the 15 presidential libraries presently are the Obama Library, which he's chosen the south side of Chicago for his, and then the Trump Library, and Trump's already in a fight. Can you imagine that? Trump's already in a fight because he wants it on 2 floors of the Trump Towers in New York. And I'm sure that's entrepreneurial. He's a great entrepreneur. He wants folks to come in, stay in his hotel, and da-da-da-da. But the committee wants it in Mar-a-Lago, Florida. So that has not been decided yet. An interesting fun fact to know and tell. And these things don't get built the day the president leaves. I mean, sometimes it's 10 years before they get enough money raised to build and get the property settled. In many cases, the states where they're housed gave the property, which is mighty wise of them too, because they're great tourist attractions. Previous administrations had left their papers all the way from George Washington on to some universities, some private collections. Many of them sold them, literally just sold their papers away to make money, because all of our presidents were not rich, especially the earlier presidents. And so FDR had great vision, like he did in many things, in my opinion, to establish these presidential libraries. And then the National Archives and History became the lead dog on it, I think, in an act that was passed in the 60s. And then in 1978, the Presidential Records Act was passed, which completely solidified and jailed together all of the presidential libraries under the National Archives and Records Administration. Let me just tell you right quick where they are. And I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you've been to any of these. The Herbert Hoover Presidential Library is in West Branch, Iowa, at his birthplace. It's not on the grounds of his birthplace, I understand. We'll find that out shortly, but it's near his birthplace. His birthplace is in the next little town over, but he was raised in West Branch, and it's there. FDR is in Hyde Park, New York. Harry Truman is in Independence, Missouri. Dwight D. Eisenhower's on his birthplace in Abilene, Texas. Y'all been there. John F. Kennedy Presidential Library is at Boston. Oh, it's fascinating. It's very fascinating. Lyndon Baines Johnson is on the campus of the University of Texas, Austin. The Richard Nixon Library is at his birthplace in Yorba Linda, California. Fascinating. It might be my favorite so far. It's close. It's running close to Reagan. It's funny, the two California libraries have honestly intrigued me most. I was totally and completely fascinated and taken by the Ronald Reagan presidency in 1980. As a matter of fact, this lifelong Democrat, 5-generation Democrat, turned Republican. I tell folks I got off my medicine. But really and truly, Ronald Reagan did it. I even went to the convention in Detroit as an alternate delegate from the state of Mississippi to nominate Ronald Reagan.
You and I drove down to the Neshoba County Fair.
Yes, we saw him at the Neshoba County Fair first, where he declared that famous speech, "It's time for states' rights again." And that started a big movement in Mississippi. probably did the most for republicanism of anything that's happened, really, in modern times. But anyway, I was fascinated by Reagan, and I did. Oh, my God, I loved his library. George Bush Libraries at College Station, George I, at College Station, Texas, and it's a sight to behold. William Clinton Presidential Library is in Little Rock, of course, and it looks like a blown up, elongated mobile home to me. Just tell you the truth. It's pretty interesting, though. Yeah, it's up on those stilts like, and you go up an elevator, and then there's a museum on, I think, 3 floors, as best I remember. I've been to that one several times because I remember as far as investments, I was not nearly as secure financially then as I am now, but by golly, I made more money on my investments during the Bill Clinton administration than I've ever made since. So, George W. Bush is on the campus of Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and then the Barack Obama Library is about to the point of siting and starting construction, I understand, somewhere in one of those burbs in South Chicago. I read it, but I can't remember which one it was. So that's the ones that are here. Of course, 13 that I mentioned, and then Obama and Trump makes 15 that's already been sanctioned, and the blueprints and that kind of stuff have been submitted to the National Archives and Records Administration. So, well, let's talk about some of the libraries. This lady that wrote this book, Phyllis Schaefer, and she died last year. This is a 2002 book, so it's not as up to date. Did I tell y'all that I ordered the best book I've ever read in my life on presidential libraries and museums from our beloved Library Commission in Jackson? And it was supposed to have been overnighted here, Jeff, about 10 days ago. And I finally called Jeff, I think Monday. What is today, Wednesday? Monday morning, I said, Jeff, help, I don't have the book. I read it, and I remember most parts of it, but I don't have it. And he said, just chill out a minute. And he went into our library and found one that's good. It's good. It's just not as academic, and it don't have all the historical facts. I mean, this other book that I had planned to review, it goes into the committees that formed them, how they were constructed, the people that were involved from the administrations, which usually every presidential library has 4 or 5 key leaders on the board of directors from that president's administration, cabinet level people, etc. But this book is here in this library, and it's worth reading because it's a thumbnail sketch, if you will, and it also mentions all of their homes, which I had not explored that, and that's pretty interesting too. But Schaefer, the author, Phyllis Schaefer, Peggy Schaefer, makes a good case that the LBJ presidency might have been the most controversial of all presidential administrations. I did not agree with her on that. It was certainly wrought with a lot of change in this country, major social, civic change in this country. But my Lord, when you think about what Abraham Lincoln endured, and the other presidents in World War I and World War II, and the domestic and foreign policies of those presidents, I don't know where she got that, but she said that in her book, that she thought it was probably the most controversial of all. Well, LBJ was controversial. Let's call it what it is. He was very controversial. But he moved the country, too, from point A to point B. And I loved his library. I think Harold's got it. He's going to show us some slides. That is the LBJ Presidential Library on the campus, Austin, University of Texas campus. And that's almost the highest point of the campus. So that from there you see all of the University of Texas, which is, oh my God, so sprawling and so big. It's like a city unto itself. But that's sort of the hallmark. It's real boxy. It's all concrete, except on the backside that you don't see, there's glass there. One of the things that I loved about his library is the way his exhibits were stationed and spaced out. The civil rights part of his museum, quite frankly, I don't know how many of y'all have been to the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, but it was comparable, just to be honest with you. Now, unfortunately, I saw the term Mississippi way too much. I mean, it was there, you know, Betty, but It was not the best time in our state's life, but it was the time we were living in. And I understand it from a historical standpoint, but had major speeches that you could put your earphones on and listen to Fannie Lou Hamer's speeches. It had the conversations that LBJ had with Robert Kennedy during the crisis at Ole Miss, and then in the killing of the 3 civil rights workers in Philadelphia. I mean, you could go and put your microphones on, and it was the president and Governor Ross Barnett exchanging, just recorded, just like it happened. And it wasn't exactly nice, was it? Because LBJ cussed Ross Barnett out and reminded him by God that he was president of the United States and he needed to get his heart right. And so that kind of stuff you don't think you'll ever hear, but you get that when you go to a presidential library. He had a really good exhibit, or they had a really good exhibit. Johnson picked his site. He had a good exhibit on Lady Bird and her Keep America Beautiful campaign that was very significant, I thought, Brenda. And I mean, who don't love the first ladies? I've had a few presidents that I could have done without, 1 or 2 only, but I've never had a first lady that I could do without. And all these libraries emphasize family relations and certainly the spouse. And I like that about all of them. And Lady Bird was very prominent and very important to LBJ. You'd be surprised how much she did to run this country herself. And the decisions were, LBJ just about wouldn't make a major decision unless unless Lady Bird approved. So you've got a big thing on that. All these museums have little vignettes of particular times of that presidency, and they do have a lot of the recordings, actual recordings of the president's speeches. I'll get to it in a minute, but that's one thing that I loved about the Ronald Reagan Museum. I arguably, y'all all got opinions, but I think probably other than the founding fathers, Jefferson and Washington, a few of those, Ronald Reagan was the greatest orator president we've ever had. And so, oh my God, that museum was stuffed full. You could sit down and watch 10-minute movies with Reagan speeches, and it became very emotional to me because I love to hear the man speak. I thought it was pretty kinky that we had an actor president, a cowboy, that was as smart as he was, you know? But anyway, back to LBJ. It's the most interesting outside. Oh, you rolling this now, Harry? It's not terribly well landscaped. It's other than the size of it, it looks like a big, huge concrete block. It does not catch your attention until you walk in. Now, most all of these libraries, something else that I found interesting. At the entrance of all of them, there is a life-size bronze bust of every one of the presidents.
You can't see it in here, but there's a big, huge statue of Lyndon.
Yeah, right there, and we sat down.
This is actually about 15 feet tall. This building is huge.
Yeah, it's huge. It looks small there, but it's huge. Yeah, and on the back side of it, back here, is where they had the glass, and then there's the Great Hall, if you will. It's not on the entrance; it's on the back. And you look up over 3 stories or 4, I can't remember, and you see all of his manuscripts behind a huge glass wall. And that was impressive to me. Now, we'd never stopped. We didn't have time to stop and read manuscripts. We might have done a few. I don't know that we're out on public display, but the real manuscripts, you have to have appointments with all the presidential libraries to study those, and they're not hard to get, but they're going to do a background check because you're going to be handling some significant historical documentation. I love the way LBJ's life was profiled in his library, and I love the Oval Office that was reproduced totally.
Steve.
There it is right there, yeah. Several of these libraries had the Oval Office reproduced. Not all of them. But the president's got a right to decorate his office the way he wants to. you know? And so there's old Andrew Jackson. I've seen his in a lot, so there must be a law that says Andrew Jackson's got to be there forever. I don't know.
He had 2 teletype machines.
Oh, yeah, 2
And then this cabinet right here was NBC, ABC,
and CBS televisions inside that cabinet, because LBJ was big on watching himself on the news. Must have been a politician. Well, anyway, the most significant thing about the LBJ visit was we also went to his ranch in Stonewall, Texas, which was almost more fascinating than the library was. Have we got it here? Yeah, that's the Texas White House. And that house don't look big. It's been built onto and onto and onto and onto over the years. But this is the Pedernales River right here, which amounts to a little old stream flowing through your pasture, really. I don't know, we wouldn't call it a river down here, we'd call it a creek. But I'm sure when the water gets up, it's pretty wide. But it's beautiful. See these live oaks? There are hundreds of them all over the grounds. The LBJ Ranch is 6,000 acres, and it still today, just as it did when President Johnson was there, remains a working ranch. We saw some of the most beautiful livestock, and you can do a driving tour through that 6,000 acres, and we did that. And there it is. Yeah, there's some of it. All the old Texas sage, you know, that's out there. You learn a lot about Texas. We learned a lot. Anyway, enough on LBJ.
One more they might be interested in.
Oh, this is the cemetery. A lot of the presidents are buried on their library grounds. But now LBJ's father's home is on the farm, and it's just a very modest house. And the farm's been in the family a long time. LBJ added a lot of land to it. But this is Lady Bird, President Johnson's tomb right there. Just very commonplace. In the Johnson family cemetery, their grandparents are there, their great-grandparents are there. So it's a real tradition there. Let's see, we left there. We left Austin, flew into Austin, and went to College Station next. College Station. If you know anything about College Station, Texas, it is the largest land grant university in the system in the United States. Every state has a land grant. Mississippi State's our land grant. Ole Miss is more academic and polished and lawyers and doctors and that kind of stuff, but it was established to train farmers in 1877. What's that?
That's your Bush.
Yeah, that's Barbara and George Bush. Was that a display that was there? I can't remember, yeah. You could get the gist of what's there. I don't know, that's their inaugural. I think they're walking in the inaugural. They walked the trip from the Capitol to the White House. Bush is another fascinating president to me. Y'all remember, how many of you remember when he came to Tupelo? Yeah, I got to see him then, Jane, too. Yeah, was that when he was, 88, Jimmy? Yeah, but his library has an interesting architecture. Have you got a picture of the actual building? Well, it looks like any courthouse in a way in Mississippi. It's got this dome, but it's not a long, tall dome. It's this wide dome. And when you walk inside the entrance, as best I remember, it's got the 50 state flags around that dome. And it's just like all of them. That's
Camp David.
Oh, that's Camp David. Yeah, Bush was high on Camp David. Yes, he stayed more at Camp David than he did at the White House. And so there are tons of displays. It's just a fabulous history of Camp David right there.
Camp David's president's office was like, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you for helping me, Harold. But the Bush Library, George Herbert Walker Bush's library, is very systematically arranged, I thought. It was real easy on the eye and real easy to follow. It has lots of grounds, beautiful grounds. Have you got a picture of that by chance out back? Well, there's a lake, I guess you'd call it, that's so perfectly groomed and manicured that had, best I remember, 100 and something varieties of flowers all around it. And you walk down big steps because it's on a totally another level at College Station. And you walk around that lake, and then there's this little, it almost looks like you're walking in a rainforest to me. Just real concealed, bushes over a walkway and a rope wooden bridge, and you walk about 300 yards, and right in the middle of a huge grove of live oaks is the graves of Barbara and George. And their 2-year-old daughter was disinterred when George died and moved there. So I was very impressed with that. The fence is beautiful. I mean, there is not one cigarette butt. Praise God. No trash. These grounds are so immaculately kept that you just cannot believe it. But I enjoyed the library there. George Walker Bush's library is on the campus of Southern Methodist University, which is, to me, a Yale-looking university. It's right in downtown Dallas or just out from downtown Dallas. A beautiful sprawling campus with lots of old historical buildings. But the Bush Library, George Bush Library, is a very modern-looking structure that is completely absorbed and surrounded by wildflowers. And that was beautiful, Martha. It was just beautiful to behold all of the wildflowers. He also had a really good replica of the Oval Office there. And
That's his,
yeah, that's the front of the library. Is that where the burial ground's going to be? I can't remember. No, it was over by that restaurant where we ate on that slope.
right here. He
Yeah.
had a replica of the West Wing is what that is.
Yeah, that's the West Wing of the White House. A total replica of the West Wing of the White House right here. And it's got all the same stuff in it.
That's
that the
where
White
they'll be buried right there.
Yeah, this is their burial plot when they cross over. They're still with us, of course, and healthy as an ox, as far as I know. But that was a great library to visit too. These are the kind of things that are exhibits there. These things are so crammed full. I mean, they're all as big as this library building, even larger.
And that was part of the 9/11.
Yeah, 9/11, you can imagine there was incredible footage of 9/11 in that library. We talked a little bit about William Jefferson Clinton, better known as Billy Clinton Library. It's fascinating. It just didn't float my boat much. And I've been about 5 times. Love the historical material that I read in it. But I don't think they spent as much time as the other presidents did in developing their library. Do you have any opinion on that, Brenda or Harold? Or anybody else? I know several have probably been to Little Rock to see that.
It seems like the other libraries, they focused a lot on, all presidents had a crisis.
Yes.
And it didn't seem as, Clinton's was as much, there's a lot of history there, but maybe he didn't have as many crises.
And another thing that I found that was very interesting about his library, there's very little in it about Hillary. There's nothing in it that I saw about Monica Lewinsky. So it may be the most dishonest library of all of them.
Clinton himself said that one of his big regrets was that he didn't have a major, country didn't have a major threat during his presidency. Couldn't help make him greater.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true. And you know, the economy was totally tanked when he assumed the presidency, and it was the largest deficit at the time in the history of the country. And by the time he got out 8 years later, it was the largest surplus in the history of the country. So that is very emphasized in the Clinton Library, and rightly so. Interestingly enough, back behind, did you have the Clinton Library up here?
No.
Okay. Well, like I told you, it's like a big mobile home on stilts. But back behind is this vast, long garden alongside the Arkansas River. And there is a grave space there marked for one person. Hillary's not going to be buried there. So, anyway, I don't know what that's about. Did y'all ever learn about that?
Well, one of the ladies at Guides I asked, and she said she thought she was going to be more interested in being buried maybe on one of the campuses that she graduated from,
Yeah.
maybe in somewhere in Illinois.
That's right, yeah.
Where her Secretary of State and Senator
Yeah.
and other things would be a little bit more. She didn't want to be overshadowed by Clinton.
I think that's it. But I thought that interesting. But Clinton's already got his spot marked and a bench up. So there you have it. He's getting ready. I spoke a little bit about the Nixon Library. I just had this just churning in my gut about going to the Nixon Library. And it was so wonderfully alleviated the minute we went in. There's this huge, huge fountain, as big as this room, in the front of the Nixon Library. It's right in town, Yorba Linda, downtown, Yorba Linda. His birth house is still there. His actual birth house on the same site has survived since 23, well, I think it was built in 1895. There it is, right there. Just a simple little old house, but, and I don't know, this is, I think, telling about it, this big monument here.
Steve, you might mention that house, that's the original house.
It's the original house, in the bedroom where he was born.
His memoirs opens up with, I was born in the house my father built.
Yes, it did.
That's it. And they kept the house in the family. And when, I think an aunt passed away who moved in it after they had moved off. But they kept the house. She lived in it until she died, kept the furniture. That furniture was put in storage. And when they redid this house for the presidential library, all the furniture is actual furniture.
Yes, it was in the house in 2013, 1913 when he was born.
Everything in that thing is
It would easily fit in this auditorium, easily.
and you can
Not very
see
big at
the
all.
corner of the house right there. They're
Now,
buried
that's their
like
burial
30
ground.
yards from
They're buried right
where
by
he
his
was born.
birthplace. You can see how wonderful the landscaping is at all these places. I told you earlier, I mean, you walk in and on all these, you walk in, you're going to listen to about a 10-minute film on the presidents, sort of just to set the stage in a little auditorium with wood benches, most of them, to set the stage of the presidents in what you're going to see.
Steve, can you read that? That's when you come in. That was the quote from Clinton. Doesn't show up on that.
Oh, well, where's the camera? Somebody with better eyes than me may have. May the day of judging President Nixon on anything less than his entire life and career comes to a close at this library. Thought that was pretty good. I'm going to tell you something.
Clinton, by the way.
Yeah, it's by Bill Clinton. Nixon did way more than I remembered that he did. It was not a bad presidency at all. And of course, he'd been everything from governor of California to, I don't know what all offices. I mean, he was in Congress too, I believe, before he became president. A war hero, et cetera, and so forth. But
There was a big exhibit on the Vietnam War and ending the war.
Yes.
This is a POW coming home.
right, that's a POW coming home,
He
the
hadn't seen his
family.
family in like 5 years.
They're very awe-inspiring, and they're also very emotional. I mean, you know, I can't lie about it. When I saw things like that, she had a sympathetic tear along the way. The gardens, and you saw the burial spot, which is on the highest part, right by the home house. The library is sort of down in a low spot, but they've got gardens all through it. Just beautiful. I love the Nixon Library. Maybe number 2. Number 1 is Ronald Reagan for me. It's in Simi Valley, about, 25 miles from L.A., downtown L.A., up in the California mountains, which are just, is that it? Yeah. Is that their burial site? I can't remember.
No,
No, that's the garden. That's what, you see all the mountains through there. Well, it's ranch. What would you expect for Ronald Reagan? It's cowboyish. It's movie starish.
It's one story.
Well, no, it had a basement.
that's right.
Air Force One, the entire Air Force One airplane is actually in the museum. I mean, so you can imagine, this may have been the largest, that's it, yeah. That's the president's desk.
That's his jacket.
Yeah.
Over the-
Yeah, over his chair. And you go on it and see all these things, it's fascinating.
That is,
Oh, that's a
if there was
double
ever a wannabe, that's a picture of a wannabe.
Or a has-been, I'm not sure which one. We had so much fun traveling together, because not only on that trip, for example, now they are in a vault that is 18 feet deep. Now, I never did an explanation why they wanted to be 18 feet deep, but Miss Nancy's right over here, and that's, oh no, she's on the same tombstone. But I guess I don't know if they're on top of each other or underneath each other or what. I didn't inquire about that. That really wasn't anything worth knowing, but the guy did tell me they were buried 18 feet deep. So anyway, a lot of the libraries have footage of their funerals, which is so
This is
touching.
not his funeral.
What's that?
This is one of those things that I didn't realize, that it was during his presidency. This is the burying the Vietnam unknown soldiers.
Oh, that's what it was, yeah, I
And
remember that.
that whole exhibit was very, very moving.
Yeah, it was. I mean, they're so real to life, these exhibits, and you can stay in one booth as long as you want. I'd say we spent an average of 4 hours in each library, and didn't do them justice, quite frankly. I mean, if you sat and read everything and listened to everything, it'd be a couple of day visit. But you get a good synopsis of what's going on, and they're filled with people. I'm so glad the American public avails themselves to this national treasure, these national treasures, because that's exactly what they are.
One of the things that impressed me is all these libraries, the tour guides and some of your people are volunteers.
They're 100% volunteers, the people that run these museums. And they're so brilliant and so educated and so kind. They will answer any question that you have. They are called what, Harold?
What's that?
Docents.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah.
Harold had never heard that term till we got out there, and I had to explain to him what a docent was. So.
You need to go to Natchez more often.
That's the truth. You're right. Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Well, that's mostly our account and partially Peggy Schaefer's account. I wouldn't read this book if I were you. I'm
I don't
going.
think you did either.
What's that?
I said, I don't think you did either. I think it's the best book review I've heard you give when you didn't read the book.
Jack, I read pieces of it. I didn't have to read. I've been there, you know. The book that I wanted to review, I have read from toe to toe, and I don't know why I didn't buy a copy when I could have. I think because y'all didn't have it at the bookstore, but it was written in 2018 by a guy named Christian Napo, and he's a historian and a librarian on top of that. And he's written books on the Library of Congress and several books, but it was more historically based and not so much a travel guide like this one was. Well, anybody got any questions about any of the libraries? Okay.
My understanding was that the Carters were in bankruptcy shortly after they were out of the White House. So what happened with their vehicle?
It's there. They raised the money. You know, Carter's presidency was pretty controversial. Carter will forever be known, in my opinion, as the greatest humanitarian that probably ever lived in this country. I mean, and I've been to the Carter Museum. It's fascinating. It's in downtown Atlanta, about 3 blocks from the state capitol. But they did go back to Plains, basically broke. And they've got a Farmers Home Administration home that they now live in. You know, he's on hospice. He's 98, and I think Miss Rosalind's about that close too, 96 or something. And she's got dementia, real bad. But they chose to die at home. And I think the American people just surrounded him, from what I remember from the museum, with generosity and paid for all this and put them back on their feet. And then he actually sort of helped run the peanut farm again when he came home. So he did the best he could do. But at that point after the presidency, he was totally devoted to Habitat for Humanity primarily, all around the world. And so...
Steve, tell him about when you went to his church.
Yeah, well, that was a good trip. Possible Governor Brandon Presley and I set out to hear Jimmy Carter do Sunday school at the Maranatha Baptist Church. Carter was a member and grew up with his parents and grandparents in the Plains Baptist Church, a Southern Baptist church, and they acted pretty cruel during the Civil Rights Movement, wouldn't let blacks come in the church even after the Civil Rights Act was passed, and Carter didn't like that. So they took it upon themselves to build a very tacky little church on the outskirts in a peanut field from Plains called Maranatha. It's extraordinarily well toured at this point. It may not be so much now because I don't think he's taught Sunday school for maybe, I don't know. But as fate would have it, you've got to get there about 5 a.m. because you don't buy tickets. And the first group that gets there, when the last pew's filled, they cut it off, and it's tough. You just got to come back. So we got there at 5, and I never seen as many bugs in my life as there was in Plains, Georgia. I don't know if they were attracted to peanuts or what. I don't know what they were, but they were awful. They'd sting you. And there was this czarist woman that self-appointed herself as chairman of the Carter Sunday School teaching. The Sunday school teaching was phenomenal. I remember he did Sunday school lesson on the love chapter in Corinthians. So beautifully done, not one note, quoted scripture, unbelievable. He was just very steeped in biblical literature and theology. And he was very kind about it. But the thing I think Camille's talking about is the regular pianist didn't show up that morning. So President Carter said, is there by chance a pianist out in the crowd? And I was on the first pew and I raised my hand. So I got to play the piano while he led singing. Another fun thing that happened in my life. And
Do you have a video of that?
you know, I don't know. I wouldn't have made it because I was at the piano. But I got to ask Brandon that. I don't know if there's pictures of it, I know. No, there is a recording of me because I played for the prelude to God Be the Glory, and I ripped it apart. You'd have thought Jimmy Swaggart was at that piano because the Spirit had done moved up on me and totally consumed me, you know.
Have you been to the Mississippi Presidential Library?
Grant?
No.
I didn't know we had one other than Grant. No. Who? I don't know which one we're talking about. Oh, yeah, 100 times. You know, we remodeled that thing in the legislature and spent a ton of your tax dollars, and the very next week a hurricane came by and blew it down again. So we've had to put it back together twice. That happens. But yeah, it's a very historical site. No, it's a beautiful house. Beautiful house. Beautiful. I'm glad it got restored because I'm a historical preservationist. Extraordinary. I still got the outhouse, original outhouse on our farm. I don't have to use it anymore, thank God, but it's there in case of emergency. So, any other questions? Well, if you can't find anybody to review a book that he hadn't read, call Steve Holland.